Welcome to everybody. Thank you very much for taking the time out to listen to me, and hopefully you'll get something from this. There we go. So, sure you will. Take it everybody can see this, but I want to introduce today what we call meetings of understanding. And there are several processes that I want to introduce to you so that you can take it away, but also the language that we can use to actually enhance communication and build on relationships. So just a short introduction about myself. I'm Jim McGrath. I'm a social worker for 40 years, and I've worked in health, education, and social care, but I specialise now in children and families, and especially in restorative approaches. And one of the things that I'm passionate about is the restorative approach when it comes to working with people, because it encompasses everybody and allows their voice to be heard. My specialities again, and I specialize in family group conference, restorative approaches, mediation, and conflict resolution. And it's interesting because as a social worker, whenever I thought I was mediating, um, back in the day, whenever I first started, um, however, I realized how lacking it was in my mediation skills after I became a mediator, or I qualified as a mediator. Um, so these are just some of the things that I have learned over the years, which I hope will, help your practice as well. So what I want to do is, and I'm just going to move that, is to introduce yourselves to the restorative mediation approaches that support the building of relationships that have been fractured or broken because parties have not been able to hear or have been heard, or they have been misunderstood. So let me see. And to achieve this, I want to just touch on the first bit, and it's the grounding that we use, and it's the relationship window. What our relationship is with others, the language that can strengthen cooperation. So, very simple ways of changing our language so that we can actually work um, much more effectively with people who are often, suspicious of us. And introduce you to a couple of processes of meetings of understanding and those practical approaches to listening and being heard, not only for those that we're working with and ourselves, but also those within families where the relationship has broken down. And hopefully, we can, by using these processes, we can repair um, the misunderstanding or the harm that has been caused. So first, I'll introduce you to what we call the relationship window. Now, the relationship window, it's been adapted from Diane Burrind and her parenting styles. This was a 1970s parenting styles model that she would have used. And then you've got Thomas and Kilman conflict styles model, which was developed in 1974. And it'd be useful for people maybe to do their little test to see where you actually sit when it comes to conflict. So just to help you with this process, this model, I want you to think back to your school days. And I want you to choose your favorite and your least favorite teacher. Yeah. So just choose your favorite and your least favorite teacher. So how did they make you feel? Right. So how did both teachers make you feel? Okay. Okay, so in the chat, if you just put down one word of how your least favorite teacher made you feel. Yeah. Okay, horrible, small, worthless, intimidated. Yeah. Okay. Right. I think I've triggered a lot of people here. So my apologies. Right. Stupid, frightened, inadequate, all incredibly powerful, powerful feelings. And what about your favorite teacher? Again, in the chat, how did your favorite teacher make you feel? Ambitious, safe, valued, inspired, worthy, whoa, valued, worthy, enthusiastic, interested in me, valued, inspired, fantastic, happy, able, worthy, valued, liked, and wanted. Okay, so thank you. So that's been very useful. And of course, our least favorite teacher would have been tended to be high on control, but low on the relationships. There's some people whose least favorite teacher may have been low on control, but also low on the relationships. So, and then you've got over here that teacher who was high on the relationship, but low on control, right? And some people do choose them either and a minimal, either as a favorite or a least favorite because of how they felt at the time or what they needed. And then you've got your favorite teacher who would have been high in control, but also high on the relationship. So now, and again, I meant to say, if people want to ask questions or need to ask questions, just put it in the chat and just ask questions as we go along, and hopefully we'll be able to go back to them and I'll be able to give maybe an answer or two. Right. So your least favorite teacher, scared, intimidated, belittled, worthless, small, dejected, stupid. Maybe this teacher here who was low on control and low in the relationship, made you feel invisible, you were unimportant, unmotivated, you were bored, resentful, and disrespected. The teacher who was high on the relationship but low on control, well, was welcomed. You felt nurtured, you felt safe, you felt relaxed, and you felt happy. But up here, in that, with that teacher who was high on control, high on the relationship, they made you feel that they valued you, they valued your input, no matter how good, bad, or indifferent it was. They enthused you, they respected you, motivated, engaged, energized, and they made you feel special, right? But they also made everybody else feel special.
They like that. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Oh, we've got somebody with their mic on. So, okay. So let's have a look at your least favorite teacher who was coercive, right? And they tended to do it to us, right? So, and that was a self-preservation from them, and it tends to be from intense workload, a lack of meaningful support, and little time to reflect, right? And in order to survive, their philosophy was people should be managed because they needed to control everything in their sphere, right? We'll just spin that. Okay. The teacher who was low in control and low in relationships was uninvolved, right? And the appearance of disinterest is often a symptom of burnout caused by workload and work related stress. So in order to survive, people need to be ignored, right? Or are ignored. And we've been on. I love PowerPoint. So as you can see, right, the past rescuer, which was the person who was high on the relationship but low on control. And they did it for us. They would have, helped us, would have actually done our work for us and told us that's how you do it, right? And doing it for people, accepting their position of helplessness and not challenging poor decision making, right? So, and their philosophy or the way they work was that people need to be rescued. But what about that teacher who was high in control and high in the relationship? That teacher up here who listened to us, believed in us, they gave us individual attention, they wanted to help, they spent time with us, they were humorous, they were supportive, and they were creative. Well, that was what we would call a restorative teacher, right? So, and they did it with us. So, and they believe that working with people by supporting them creatively, taking the time for them to learn to do things differently, right? So, and again, they would have worked out, right, where's this person at? How can I get them a bit further up the line, right? Um, and they believe their philosophy is that people can achieve through directed support and understanding. Yeah. So if we look at it, you've got your to box, your with, your for, and your absent box, right? Now, sometimes in our work, right, we need to do it for our to people, right? We need to, if there's a safeguarding issue, we need to go in there. We need to be high in control, low in that relationship, maybe remove a child, or if we're into an investigation for elder abuse, whatever it might be, we need to do it too. But we always have to think about, after doing that, how can we do it with the person? How can we move that person to a position where they can do things differently? Likewise, if we're going to do it for people, and sometimes we have to be high on that nurturing relationship in order to allow the person to think through their situation and help them out. However, it's not healthy if we're going to do it for them all of the time because they don't learn from that. Right? And if we're doing it for them, we're carrying the load. And so we need to think, right, I have to do this for this person for X number of months, weeks or months. How can I do it with them? How can we work with that person and get them to do it for themselves, right? So we're constantly looking to the right hand box, to the right top hand box, right? Where we're high in control, but also high on that relationship. And this is all part of the restorative continuum, right? Now, I'm just going to go briefly through the continuum just to show you what's there, what's considered to be restorative and how we can work with people in a restorative way. Of course, on the low level, this is the stuff that we should be working with all of the time. The language that we use, the show of empathy and compassion, just being inquisitive, that inquiry, that curiosity, valuing people, recognizing where they're at and where they could be at in a year's time, 6 months' time, whatever it might be able to listen and listen to them uh, you know, at a deeper level than what we normally do on a day-to-day level. We should be using affirmative statements, affirming them, and affirming their thinking. And I'll move on to that later. All those in the dark areas are the bits I'll be touching on. Non-violent communication, and that's again around the language that we use and being non-judgmental, right? So because term that I came across, or a quote I came across back in the 1980s, was that everybody is doing their very best given the information that they have at that given time. Right? So everybody is doing their best given the information that they have at that given time. And I firmly believe that people are trying their very best, and it's the information that they have. And just telling them doesn't actually change the information they have. They have to change their way of thinking and hotwire it into their brain, because they've been hotwired from a child to, whenever we become involved, to do things different to what we would see as safe parenting. Right. So the informal practices are the restorative questions, three-way shuffle, appreciative inquiry, informal mediations, informal negotiations, questions of understanding, circle approaches, and systemic practices. And again, these approaches are informal. We can use them on a day-to-day level, but we can also use them as a process that we prepare and then execute. And that might take a couple of days, may take a week, maximum 2 weeks, right? So we're not talking a long time. So, and then your high level formal processes, the likes of family group conference, restorative conferencing, meetings of understanding, mediation meetings, restorative circles, and facilitated groups and circle approaches. Now they are at the high end level, and they need a lot of preparation. So, for instance, the likes of mediation, family group conference, restorative conferencing, can take up to 6 to 8 weeks to prepare families or individuals to go into a meeting like that. Likewise, with meetings of understanding, we're looking at anything from you know a week's preparation or a couple of days preparation to 2 weeks, and then we can run with them. So some are quicker than others. And again, you'll see the meetings of understanding that has been highlighted. I'm going to touch briefly on how that links in with the three-way shuffle. But first of all, I'm going to start with affirmative statements and other useful language. I think the language that we have inherited, certainly here in Ireland, and Britain would be the same, is that we've heard negative language, right? To question behaviour deemed as unacceptable. And that comes from, according to scholars, that comes from our view of children. Children should be seen and not heard. We're adults, we know better, etc. So the language, negative language, has been kind of hotwired into us, and we need to change some of the words. And we're talking about just simple language or simple words that can be changed and would make a huge difference. With our relationship, between the ourselves and the people that we're working with. So you need to change the response, or to change the response, you need to change the language that we use. So here are a couple of tips for you, right? Instead of using the word why, so why did you do that? Why is the house a mess? Why is your room not tidy? Then again, you can practice this tonight with your children. Use what instead, right? Because why, there's a judgment there. You've already made up your mind. The person that's receiving that question has receives it as a judgment, and so they will react to what they've just heard, right? Because it is a negative. It's why. So again, the inference is you're in the wrong. right? And that. So all you have to do is change that. Instead of using why, replace it with what. So what happens, right? So what happens that uh, caused the argument last night, right? Instead of why did you argue with X last night, with your mum last night, or with your partner last night, right? So what happened? And that changes the view. If I were to ask the last person in, why were you late? So I could imagine that would, in the response, that would create, a bit of a barrier between me and that person, right? They become defensive. Whereas if I had asked, well, what happened that made you late? I'm just being curious, right? I'm interested in that person's story. And that's the reason why using what is so important, right? Because it shows that you're interested. You want to find out everything. Doesn't matter whether they are in the right or in the wrong, but you're interested in their story. And for the person receiving that, it's very important to hear. Again, instead of using but, replace it with ands. Because when we use the word but, the people, it doesn't matter how positive you've been beforehand, whenever you use the word but, they don't hear the positive statements. They will hear what comes after buts, right? So your room's lovely and tidy, but, and then there's a negative that comes in. So, but your room's lovely and tidy. And I was wondering, you know, is there anywhere else you could put your games, whatever it might be? Okay. But try and replace the word but with ands. It can be difficult, both the whys and the buts, we are hardwired to use those words. Again, needs and not wants, because whenever we want something, we're in a position of power, right? I want you to do that, right? I want this finished before the end of the day, right? And I'm sure a lot of you have had bosses. I'm not saying you've had bosses now that would do that, but I'm sure you've had bosses that have actually said that to you in the past. And that doesn't motivate anybody, right? However, if somebody actually says, well, I need, you know, or we need this done before the end of the day, I need it done before the end of the day. Is there anything that would help? That changes your relationship with the person who's actually demanding or asking you to do something, and you'll be more motivated. And likewise with all those people that we work with, all the clients that we work with, they too will be more motivated if you use the word need instead of want, right? Again, we is very useful because it's talking about partnership, right? We need to get this finished before the end of the day. We need to get this tidied. We need X, Y, and Z rather than you need to do this, right? So if you use just the we instead of the you, okay. Again, a lot of the times when we were talking about families, we use different language, like they have problems. This is a problem family, or this is a dysfunctional family. Right? Now, we may not say it in front of the families that we're working with, but we'll say it to our colleagues. We'll say it in the office. We'll say it in supervision, right? And that in itself, changes our perception of those, that family or the people that we're working with, right? So it's not problems. You've got a problem here. You need to fix it. You've got a challenge, right? So how can that challenge be overcome, right? Again, it's just softening the language. It's not, and conflict is the same. Right? There's a lot of conflict in this house, so there's a lot of fighting going on. That in itself, it's huge. It's like those words that you use whenever you talk about your least favorite teacher. They're powerful words, which then trigger people into inaction because they're afraid, that it engenders some fear, right? Whereas instead of conflict, instead of fighting, say, well, you've got there's some differences here between your partner and yourself, or your ex-partner and yourself, between your child and yourself. So there are differences here. How can we overcome them? And likewise, you don't have problems, you've got challenges. How can you overcome those challenges? Right? Different rather than better, right? So, oh, you could have done that better, right? Just switch it around to how could you do that differently? And again, get them to think it through, right? So get them to think about, how they can do it rather than you suggesting. Because again, we often take the shortcut, especially if we're under stress, we're tired, and just we often give the answer to the person itself, so we do it for them rather than allow them to do it for themselves. Okay. Now, I got a sign up here. Alison said the internet's a wee bit shaky on it.
It's okay at the moment, Jim. You're coming across clear.
It's okay. That's grand.
Okay.
So that's the language. Is there any questions? Let's have a look in the chat and see.
Yes. Nikki's just asked one there. How do we frame this with people who are really stuck?
Right. Okay. Right. Thank you, Nikki, for that. Right. And again, it's that drip effect that we would talk about. Whereas if you get a drip from a drain, and it's just one drip, every 5 minutes or whatever, over a period of time, it cuts into the tarmac or into the concrete below, and it starts digging away, right? Yet it's one drip at a time. And so it's not, for some people who are stuck, it's about kind of mirroring your practice, and they will see the positivity in that. Now, it's going to take, for some people, it'll take longer to get there than others. And again, if you think of your favorite teacher, your favorite teacher had that drip effect on those pupils who were so kind of lagging behind. And so they use different methods to get them to see, or get them to a point where they could actually keep up with the rest of the class. I suppose for me, again, it's about learning and the learning styles. I worked with a family years ago now, and in working with the family, they just didn't they were unable to connect as I was talking to them. And so I brought a flip chart out with me out to the house, set it up, and did a genogram with them. And for the first time, they realized it was like one of those light bulb moments for them. Whenever they saw it up in black and white, and the relationships, the fractured relationships, the impact that behaviors may have had on their children, etc., those strong relationships, etc., it changed their perspective, or their view of themselves and of the family, and themselves within the family itself. So, so again, it's about taking it at people's pace. Now, there are times where we're unable to do that because we're hitting a deadline, etc. And I don't think deadlines are useful, because some people take longer than others. And again, if they're ingrained, if they're hot wired to talk negatively about themselves or about others or their situation, then that's going to take a wee bit longer. So I hope that helps, Nikki. So, and now, so okay, so let's talk about how we can use work with families, and one of the things that we need to do is listen with curiosity and respond with compassion. Right now, it's not about, and I know it's very difficult, especially when we're out there to make an assessment, etc. But sit and ask those questions and just be curious. Well, what happened? And when was the last time that this happened? And how did you try and resolve it then? So just, and who in your family was the most resilient? You know, great question to ask people who are struggling. Who are the most resilient in your family? And what was it that they did to overcome any challenges that they had in their life? Right. So, and validate with intent to build the person's self-worth and the relationship. And we want to talk about that in the next slide. So, and explore options with the freedom of creativity. Right? Because sometimes what we do is, you know, especially when we're working with children, you know, they have this unicorn thinking, I call it unicorn thinking, where anything is possible. Anything is possible. So what we want to do is just explore options with them with freedom of creativity, right? And just enjoy their thinking. But likewise with parents or with the elders, elderly people, you know, it's important that they have that sense of creativity, because out of that creativity will come and you'll find a nugget that you can actually work with. And I worked with a school in Essex, and the school itself, it was school where young people, a PRU, pupil referral unit, young people from the ages of 8 up to 16 were referred there because they couldn't stay in mainstream school. Now, the school itself was a um, burnt out pub in the middle of the sink estates. And so all you had was the within the walls, the classrooms, and then as a parent, had a small area barrels of beer used to be stored, and that was it. There was a basketball net there. Those children who had a lot of energy, and you know, sometimes that energy would flow out to become a negative because they were getting frustrated. They weren't getting the exercise they needed. But the school didn't have, you know, a playground, so they could run off some of that energy. So we sat down, and I allowed staff to come up with as many suggestions as possible as to how they could overcome that. There were some practical ones, you know, the likes of we could use the primary school across the way where their children aren't using the playground, etc. We could take them to the swimming pool at least once a week. That was another suggestion. And then one of the teachers said we could use the roof. It was a flat roof. We could use the roof upstairs, and it got a bit of a laugh. I said, well, tell us a wee bit more about that. I said, well, if we can get a fence up and a wire grid, you know, they could go up there, they could run around, they could play football, etc., without losing the ball. And that was it. And I left it at that, left it to them to sort out. Lo and behold, I get a call 6 months later. Guess what we have? And they sent me photographs of the playground on the roof. And again, that came from creative thinking and being allowed to think creatively. right? So everything was on the table, and they talked about that, and that was the most viable answer, because they could use it at any time that they wanted, and that suited their needs rather than the needs of the school next door or the swimming pool, etc. Okay. So, and one way to do this is using affirmative statements. Right? Affirmative statements affirms another person's position or their thinking without agreeing with them or colluding with them. And it's just valuing their thought process at that moment in time and what they're thinking. And by just validating that, but validating, what happens is you get the more creative thinking from that person, because you've just given them permission to think differently. Right. Right. So validation, it's to acknowledge and affirm someone's feelings, experiences, or viewpoints, showing empathy and understanding. There's encouragement. It encourages, it boosts morale and confidence. Right? And you want to motivate or inspire that person. And so, whenever they're not being put down or their suggestions have been disregarded, they're going to feel more confident and feel more motivated to do things differently. It reinforces, or reinforcement. It's to confirm and reinforce the positive behaviour, their actions and their decisions. Right? And it builds trust, because it establishes and maintains trust in the relationship, demonstrating that you value and respect the other person. And it creates positivity. So to foster a positive atmosphere, reduce tension, and enhance overall communication. Right? And again, I'm going to take you back to our favourite teacher. And that's what they did. That's that's the reason why they were our favorite teacher, because we felt validated, we were encouraged, it reinforced us as human beings. He saw or she saw the human side of the human being, that vulnerable side, those struggles that we would have had, etc. And they valued uh, that. They built trust, so we trusted them, and we believed that they knew, how we were feeling, and we were able to ask difficult questions. Whereas certainly in my least favorite teacher, I was afraid to ask a question, so my learning was stunted, right, because of that fear. And then it creates that positivity. Of course, our favorite teacher. It was always a joy to go into their class. So, what are those statements, right? Well, I can understand why you might think this way. So, I was thinking, right? And again, this is very interesting, because what you're doing is, I can understand why you might think that. I was thinking, what you've done is, right? You've kept the door open for that person to hear your thinking, right? I can understand why you think that way. I was thinking. Whereas if we were to say, well, yeah, I understand where you're coming from, but I don't think that will work. I was thinking, right? They're going to shut down and they're not going to hear you, because, they're not going to validate you if you haven't validated them, basically. That's an interesting idea. Tell me what you think of mine, right? Again, keeping that door open. Oh, I can see where you're coming from. So I was thinking, right? And thought of it like that, etc., right? That's a very creative idea. Or I wish I'd thought of that, because I was thinking, right? And again, what you're doing is you're validating those thoughts, whether good, bad, or indifferent, and then you're adding to that. So tell me more about that idea. What are the challenges within it? You know, how can you overcome those challenges? Or what is it that you like about those, that idea? Right? And that again that creates a positivity within the person themselves, and they will open up and begin to actually explore different options which may not have been there for them, may not have been there before. Yeah. Is there any questions that you want to ask about the language or the statements?
Some questions in the chat, so maybe.
Yeah, just put them in the chat.
Just shout.
Okay. Okay. Right. Well, we'll move on to the three-way shuffle. And the three-way shuffle came about at 2000. Oh, we've got power inequality. Right. Thank you, William. So the three-way shuffle came around about, well, it was 2010. And I was working with a family or a parenting group at the time. And one of the parents had a difficulty. We were sent them home for a week to try out another process. And in that process, the parent came back and said, no, it didn't work. This is what's happened. And what she described was the triangulation, the drama triangle. Right. So, and within the drama triangle, for those that don't know, within every conflict, you have the perpetrator or the persecutor, you have the person who sees themselves as victim, and then you have the rescuer. Right. In this case, persecutor was an older brother. The victim was the younger brother, and the rescuer was the mum. So mum would come in, shout at the older brother, and then the older brother would get annoyed, and later, in order to reclaim his power, would go to the younger brother and do something. Right, that was obviously negative. It wasn't a nice thing. So we had a look at this, and then we came up with the three-way shuffle. Right, so and this is now being used, right, with mediators, because it within either one session or a planned session that takes on 2 weeks max, right, in preparation, and we're only talking about a couple of sessions in between, and maybe 6 hours max in those 2 weeks, compared to mediation, which may take 4 to 6 weeks and would take up to 30 or 40 hours in order to prepare people for it. The three-way shuffle is a quick and easy process, and it's a hybrid between mediation and restorative approaches. Right. Quote from Gillian Anderson: "There's a difference between being listened to and being heard." And according to Cheryl Richardson, people start to heal the moment they feel heard. And the three-way shuffle is about hearing what the other has to say. We use it, and I use it, whenever there's a misunderstanding. It hasn't come to any harm being caused. Both parties feel that, they're in the right, and the other is in the wrong. It's quite a simple process, but to explain what happens whenever people stop hearing each other or stop listening to each other, I'm going to introduce you to what's known as the filters of cooperation, or to cooperation. This is John Paul Lederach, quite an established mediator in community relations. So the message I want to give to the other person, it appears clear to me. Right? However, it passes through several filters, and it's heard as criticism, attacks, or is heard as uncaring. Now, again, in the chat, if you could, what might those filters be for the people that you're working with, or for somebody that you're in conflict with at the moment, or have a difference with at the moment? What do you think the filters might be that stops a person hearing the message that you want to give them? Right? What might those filters be? Okay. So, fear, exhausted, unequal relationship, powerless, fear, lack of resources, scared, distrust, ego, lack of interest, previous negative experiences, what they've heard in the past, trauma, lack of trust, power relationships, if you're in authority, background and past experiences, stress, trauma, rejection, preposition, stress, worried about completely being honest, lack of trust, third party, past experiences, power imbalances. Fantastic. So that's great. Thank you very much. And let me see. There we go. So yeah, you've got maybe emotions, the history with the person or the organization that the person represents, the agenda, either your agenda or the other person's agenda or the organization that they work with, your impression of them, old hurts, you know, not only old hurts, but current hurts, etc., might get in the way. There's fear, culture, caution, embarrassment, and guilt and shame. And, you know, when tensions run high, what happens is, and that's known as defensive listening. So what we're doing whenever, you know, we're in that position, we start to listen out for trigger words and trigger actions. And so whenever we're triggered, then we react, right? So we become defensive, we're triggered, and then we react. And so that's what the person hears, and then they respond to what they have heard. With the three-way shuffle, what we want to do is to minimize those filters so the person can hear clearly what's actually being said. Right? So, and we give the person an opportunity to clarify what they want the other person to hear. So that's with precision, and it's said in a respectful way. Those filters will still be there. Some will have gone, but the majority of them will have softened a bit, and so the message gets through a lot clearer, right? And so instead of being heard as criticism, it's heard with clarity and understanding. So how do we do that? So there you go. You've got the other person is now listening to hear. They reflect on what they have heard, and then they respond to what they have heard. And that's a cycle that goes round until both parties hear the other with clarity and precision. So the three-way shuffle, it's a process designed to allow two people to hear each other with that clarity and the other person's message and its true meaning. This is achieved through the repetitive asking of one to express what it is that the other needs to hear, and checking if it has been heard as it was meant to be delivered. Right? And the word need is very important. Because if we were to ask somebody, what do you want the other person to hear? Right? They're going to come out with a different response to what is it that you need the other to hear. Right? So And what happens is the person on the receiving end begins to hear the feelings of the other, whether voiced or not. So it's a really simple process. Facilitators needed to assist the listening to happen. We begin with a chosen person, say mum, right? And ask them what they need the other to hear. And with the emphasis on need. Check out what the other has heard, right? So what did you hear your mum say? And then ask the mum again, is that what you wanted the other to hear, right? And you repeat that. You don't paraphrase, you do nothing, you just repeat that cycle until the other person has heard clearly. And it's verified by the first person what they wanted to be heard. And then we switch round to give the second person an opportunity to express their need to be heard and what it is that they want the other to hear. Right. And here are the questions. Quite simple. What do you need a person to hear? What did you hear, your mum say? Is that what you wanted that person to hear, your son to hear? And that's it. And we just go around. Now, I'll give you an example of how to choose, and I'm not going to go through the whole scenario, but basically, colleague of mine went to call visit her sister and walked right into the middle of a big argument between her 17-year-old son and the mother. And what the mother did was, or what the son had done was the night before, he hadn't come in at the designated time. He was an hour late. Now, in his defence, he was in town, they missed the bus, etc. However, he had turned his phone off so his mum couldn't contact him. And his mum was quite fearful and had paced the house up and down until her son came in. Now, it was roughly around 10 o'clock, 10:30 that evening. Instead, as soon as he opened the door, she kind of said, "Where were you?" etc. He said, "Look, I'm not getting into an argument with you. I'm going to my bed." And that was it. He started upstairs and went to his bed, got up early the next morning, and went to school. Right? And then on his return from school, his mum then challenged him again. Now, Lisa came in right in the middle of this and she said, "Look, I was at training today and I've got a process that I think might help you." And this is what she used. Right? So she said to her sister, John's mum, "What do you need John to hear?" And so the mum said, "I need him to hear that he can't, he can't come in. He knows he has to come in, at the time that we agreed. He can't. He turned off his phone, and I was really worried. I was pacing the house until he came in, and then when he came in, he wouldn't even talk to me. And I was on the verge of ringing the hospital to see if he had ended up in the hospital." Right. So that's what the mum said. Right. She was worried. She was anxious, etc. When she went to John, said, "Right, what did you hear your mum say?" Right. So as a teenager, what do you think John had heard? I'm going to shortcut this and I'll tell you straight off. What did you hear your mum say? I heard my mum say that she doesn't trust me, she thinks I'm taking drugs, and she doesn't like my friends. Right. And so Lisa went back to her sister and says, "Is that what you wanted John to hear?" And of course, mum said no. "Well, what do you need John to hear?" We would always repeat the question, even before the person starts, um, going into it again. We would stop and say, "What do you need John to hear?" And so she repeated that, but every time she did it, she got a bit clearer And eventually John had heard Mum was anxious. She worried whenever he was out late, etc., etc. And from that, developed, and I'm not going to go into it, but developed Mum's was able to talk about a time in the past. So within that scenario, and all of a sudden it clicked with John why his mum was so anxious whenever he would have come in late, even though he was coming in earlier than his peer group. And that gave him a lot of understanding of Mum's behaviour. So then when it came to John, what did you hear, or what do you need your mum to hear? And he talked about wanting to be the same as his friends, the reasons why he turned the phone off, because he knew his mum would come into town, pick him up, and all they'd done was miss the bus, and etc., etc. And again, Mum began to understand the importance of John's friendship group. Right, at 17 years of age, he wants to be the same as them. Okay, right. So after both, and then we would go back to Mum and back to then John for clarification, for a bit of a wrap up, if there was anything missing, and then go, well, what needs to happen to move things forward, and allow them then to come up with a plan to help them. Okay. So the three-way shuffle, it's used whenever communication is broken down, both parties feel aggrieved that the other is in the wrong, and you want that done and dusted. That took 20 minutes. And again, some of the most complex cases I've certainly worked on and my colleagues have worked on, they've taken no more than 40 minutes. Usually whenever we start this process, it might take up to, an hour from start of the meeting to the finish of it. Okay. Okay. Is there any questions just on that?
No, there's no questions.
No questions.
Chat,
okay.
But you can always shout out if you have a wee question.
Yeah. So it's a three-way shuffle. So, and again, we're not talking about, and that's it used on, an ad hoc basis. What you can do is you can plan it as well. And again, it's about taking an hour to meet with the two parties and then agreeing to then meet at a designated time. I have run them within a space of 3 days, or I've taken and my max has been about a week and a half, right? Because they were a bit more complex, right? And that was that was in preparation and then execution, at the meeting itself. So they take roughly, anything from, half an hour to 40 minutes, whenever you get used to that way of working. So, and again, we don't paraphrase. We don't, and as a mediator, we've been trained to paraphrase, etc. What we do is we allow people, so what do you need John to hear? Mum will say that, and then I'll just ask that question. What did you hear your mum say? Right? Without doing the work for them, because if I paraphrase, or if I say to Mum, right, well, Mum, I heard you say X, Y, and Z. John has heard me, not his mum. And then if I would go to John and say, what did you hear your mum say? He'll repeat what I say, because he'll want to, kind of seem or appear to be reasonable in front of me, because I've said it as a stranger. Yeah. So just stick to the questions and trust the process. Now, there is another process, a group process called the fishbowl circle. And in the fishbowl circle, we do something similar, but we're working with groups, be groups of families, community groups, neighbourhood disputes. So in extreme cases, we've used it with ex-combatants or from the different paramilitary groupings, bringing together both Republican and Loyalists, and use this process to help them hear each other. And that's all. It's concentric circles. Excuse me. I'll just take a drink of water. Oh. It's two concentric circles, both looking inwards. The inner circle is the talking circle. The outer circle is the listening circle. And we encourage then people who are in the talking circle, those on the outside have to listen without interruption to what those on the inside are saying. And then after 5 minutes, we switch circles. And those in the inner circle now can respond to what they've heard and to add to that conversation. Okay. So I'll just check the time. Okay, we've got it's 1 o'clock now, and I'll go quickly round or through this now. I'll just go quickly through the restorative questions. Again, that last one, the three-way shuffle, that was used whenever there's understanding or a lack of understanding or a breakdown in communication between two people. So with the questions of understanding, what we do is, or we use them, are the restorative questions, we use them whenever there's conflict, whenever harm has been caused. And basically, this model is based on the Bush and Folger approach to transforming conflict. So whenever we see conflict, we tend to manage that conflict. Sometimes we need to manage it, right? We'll manage it, we'll contain it, and then we walk away, right? We've done that, that's our bit over. However, the person who is displaying that anger, then they're still holding some feelings, right? And it was the feelings that led to the behavior. An issue, maybe earlier with yourself or with somebody else, that led to the feelings, that led to the behavior. And then we've got to work out, well, who was it, in that relationship that created the issue, that led to the feelings, that led to the behavior? And we often leave out and we miss out the issues and the feelings. However, what we need to do in order for people to, rather than continue that behavior, right? And instead of us managing it, because that's a short fix, what we have to do is we have to deal with the feelings, or explore those feelings, or explore the issue that led to the feelings, if the relationship is going to be improved. And one way of doing that, whenever there's harm caused, is by using the restorative questions. And again, a very useful set of questions, and I'm just going to go quickly through them, right? Can be used in any situation where harm has been caused, right? And for the person who has been harmed, and again, you'll notice I'm not going to use the word victim, because again, that places somebody in a certain role. And not everybody that has been harmed would see themselves as a victim. Right? However, even victims, by using that word, we place them one step down as somebody who's helpless. Right? And what we want to do is to change that perception of harm. Right? So the person in harm, it gives them a voice, an opportunity to talk about their experience directly to the person who has caused the harm, right? And the impact on them of the other's actions. It gives them an explanation of what happened in context. And a lot of times when people have, been harmed, they'll ask themselves, why me? Am I a bad person? Is it me? What was it about me that they picked on me, that they mugged me? Did I walk up that street? Why did I not walk up the other street? So, etc. So, and it helps them regain their power of equity. So they're not a victim or a witness. And again, in our legal system, we treat the victims of crime as witnesses, not as victims. You do have a victim impact statement at the end, but they will be put up on the dock and they will be cross-examined, right? And quite often in the most brutal way. So you're almost re-victimizing victim in a situation like that. And then you have closure, both emotional closure and physical closure as well. So, because the agreement with the other person is done with your consent, right, and your input. So you can agree something with that other person, what they can do to repair the harm. Now, the person who has caused the harm, it gives them an opportunity just to tell their story. It's also an opportunity for them to demonstrate their remorse through verbal and body language. And it creates an understanding from them, hearing the other person's experience directly. Because some people will minimize, and certainly this is what often happens, will minimize what they have done. They'll say, oh, it was only a phone. And I worked with a girl years ago, but 20 odd years ago now, and she'd no burner phone. And this lad walked past, she'd left it on the table, he lifted it. She went off to the toilet, it was in a cafe, she lifted it. That was it. Old burner phone. I think there was £10 credit on it. Right? Now, to him, he used the £10 credit and then tossed the phone. However, to the person whose phone the phone belonged to, whenever she told her story, this young person had a very, very different experience, right? A very different view of that. To him, it was a burner phone. To her, it was the last messages that she had received from her mum, text messages, and that she had sent and received from her mum when her mum was in the hospice and was dying. So she had about months stored messages from her mum. And so that phone no longer was a burner phone and could be tossed away. Right? It was something emotional. There was an emotional connection to that phone. That young person heard that, and from that had a different view of his crime. So, and he saw it as more than just lifting a phone. So he has better understanding, and then it gives us an opportunity to repair the harm that has been caused. Right. And again, the questions asked help to deal and put aside some of the shame that people feel. So whenever we do something wrong, we feel shame. And again, this is from Nathason's 1992 Pride and Sex, Pride and Shame. And it's it's a bit of a tomb, I have to admit. If you're looking to read something really useful and easy, right, I would go with John Bradshaw and his book on shame, right? The shame that binds us. And it for me, and I got it in the 70s, I think, or 80s. And I've bought so many copies for colleagues, etc. But it helped me understand families that I work with. Right? So whenever people are feeling those toxic feelings of shame, what they do is they withdraw by isolating themselves, running, hiding. They don't want to face it. They attack themselves, self-put down, masochisms, they'll harm themselves, etc. They'll avoid it by either denial, no, I didn't do that, you can't prove it, etc. abusing drugs and alcohol, right? So just just suppressing those feelings, or distracting through thrill seeking, right? Joyriding, climbing up on roofs, breaking into places, you get that buzz just to dampen the shame that they feel. Or they'll attack others by turning the tables. No, it wasn't my fault, it's all yours, or lashing out verbally or physically. Okay, so what are these questions? Quite simply, what happened? What were you thinking about at the time? What have you thought about since? Who's been affected in what way? What could you do differently the next time? And what needs to happen to make things better or for you to repair the harm? Okay. Now, if you look, on the right-hand column, you've got first question's factual. Second question, what were you thinking about at the time? It's internal, and it goes to the heart. What have you thought about since? helps the person to reflect. Who's been affected in what way? What could you do differently the next time? Practical question. And what needs to happen to make things better? Right? And very simply, these are questions. A 16-year-old came up with this. It was like going from the head to the heart and back to the head again. What were you thinking, or what happened? What were you thinking about at the time? What have you thought about since? Who's been affected? What could you do differently the next time? Or how can you repair the harm? Going from the head to the heart and to the end. And Carl Tom, he's a Canadian family therapist. He would call these your orientating questions. So it's about asking about the problem, the behavior, or the experience. What happened? What were you thinking about at the time? And what have you thought about since? Influencing questions. Ask with the intent to influence people to change their behavior and feelings and thinking. So who's been affected? In what way? What could you do differently the next time? What needs to be done? Make things better, stroke to repair the harm. Right? And that's an influencing, those are influencing questions. And I have to say, they are incredible questions to ask. Right? It can be done on a one-to-one with the person, or it can be done with the two people sitting facing each other. Right? So, and then you've got your correcting questions. And again, like Tom, we'd say you do not, absolutely do not use a correcting question. And a correcting question it contains an embedded suggestion. So, do you think it would be a good idea to walk away the next time? Right? That is a question, right? But you've just embedded a suggestion. So the person's not doing the work that they should be. And we would always say, if you're doing all the work, they're doing none of it. Yeah. And I'm going to finish. So, now, thank you. I'm just going to finish with this quote from Brené Brown. In order for connection to happen, we have to allow ourselves to be seen and really seen. And in all of these processes, what we're asking people is we want to see your vulnerability, we want to see your remorse, etc. And for me, as a social worker, prior to taking up restorative approaches, I have to say that for me, this approach has transformed my practice and my view of people. So who either have caused harm or who are in difficult and vulnerable situations. So thank you very much for your attention, and I think that's it. I hope you got something out of it. And if you haven't, don't tell anybody. If you have, tell loads.